We need clarity in this campaign. And that is what I offer. Say, one of the things that happens when you're in Washington too long, you start talking Washington speak. I remember we were in a debate, this back in Las Vegas, myself, John Edwards, and Hillary. And John Edwards ran a terrific campaign as well. And we are proud of how he lifted up poverty and lifted up working families. But I was asked during the debate, Tim Russert said, "What's your biggest weakness?" I said, "Well, I'm always losing paper. So I always have to have somebody around me to help me file things and keep my desk clean." So he asked, "Well, Senator Edwards, what's your biggest weakness?" I said, "Well, I'm just so passionate about helping poor people." And then they asked Senator Clinton and said, "Well, I'm just so impatient to bring about change in America." And I wanted to say to Tim, can I do this over? Because when they said, "What's your biggest weakness?" I thought they meant, "What's your biggest weakness?" Right. But I haven't been in Washington that long, so I didn't understand that it meant you should start bragging about yourself.
Say that, sir! I love this man.
Those are the habits you fall into in Washington. So when I went to Detroit, I said, we're going to raise fuel efficiency standards on cars. When Senator Clinton went there, she wouldn't say. Because the concern was, well, maybe I don't know how that's going to play in Michigan. But you know what? We can't afford to poll test every position we take. We can't be worrying about what Mitt or John or whoever is going to say about us. This party, the Democratic Party, has always been at its best when it led not by polls, but by principles. Not by calculation, but with conviction. When we summoned an entire nation to a higher purpose, a common purpose, and that is why I am running for President of the United States of America. Now there's one last argument you have to consider, because I've been hearing this more and more lately. I talk about hope a lot in my campaign. And I talk about hope out of necessity because if you think about it, the odds of me standing here before you are pretty slim. I wasn't born into money, I wasn't born into fame or fortune. I was born to a teenage mom. My dad left me when I was 2 years old. I was raised by a single mother and my grandparents. And they didn't have a lot, but they gave me love, they gave me an education, and they gave me hope. So, it's true, I talk about hope a lot. I've got hope on my signs. I gave this speech at the Boston Convention about hope, and I wrote a book called The Audacity of Hope. But I noticed lately, we've been seeing some criticisms where Senator Clinton and others say, he talks about hope so much. He's so naive. He's a talker, not a doer. He's a hope monger. The implication is that somehow if you talk about hope, you must be engaging in wishful thinking. That you must be passive. That you're just going to sit back and wait for things to happen to you. That you're shirking from a fight. That you're not willing to struggle. That's not what hope is. Hope is not blind optimism. Hope is not ignorance of the barriers that stand in your way. Hope is not avoiding the difficulties that inevitably come in any worthwhile endeavor. Hope's just the opposite. I know how hard it's going to be to provide health care to every American. The insurance and the drug companies, they will not give up their profits easily. I know how hard it will be to craft an energy policy that makes sense. ExxonMobil likes those profits.
Yes, they do.
I know how difficult it will be to put young men and women who are standing on street corners in the inner city back on a pathway to success in life. Some of that poverty is deep-rooted, and there's still some selfishness in this society that says that's not our problem. I know how difficult it is to lift our schools up because we don't like having to pay for somebody else's child. And sometimes all of us shirk responsibility for our children. But I know how hard these things are because I have fought on the streets of Chicago as a community organizer. I have fought in the courts as a civil rights attorney. I have fought in the legislature, and I've passed some good legislation, but I've seen good legislation die because good intentions were not enough. They were not fortified with political will or political power. I've seen this country's judgment clouded by fear, a politics of fear that uses tragedies like 9/11 to scare up votes instead of bring this country together around a common purpose. I know how hard change is. But I also know this, that nothing worthwhile in this country has ever happened except somebody somewhere was willing to hope. That is how this nation was founded. A group of patriots like Mr. Rodney there, declaring independence, standing up to the mighty British Empire. Nobody gave them a chance. That's how the slaves and abolitionists resisted a wicked system, and how a new president charted a course to ensure this nation would not remain half slave and half free. That's how the greatest generation, my grandfather fighting in Patton's army, my grandmother staying behind with a baby, working on a bomber assembly line, how that generation defeated fascism and Hitler and lifted itself up out of a Great Depression. That's how pioneers traveled west. That's how immigrants came from distant shores. That's how women won the right to vote. That's how workers won the right to organize. That's how young people traveled south and they marched and they sat in and they suffered fire hoses and attack dogs, and some went to jail and some died for freedom's cause. That's what hope is.